this is Avril, and today I'll be doing a presentation on independence movement in Czechoslovakia. So what are the origins of independence movement in Czechoslovakia? So these were caused by people's concern with social, economic, and political status of their living. And they will often ask the government of USSR and Czechoslovakia for what they want, however they were constantly suppressed by the government. This causes uprising movements, and some of these reasons include anti-colonialism, and these are purges, show trials, and gulags. So Stalin led to executions of people in Czechoslovakia who believed in trichosism and Titoism in order to maintain his power. So there were events like there were 150,000 political prisoners, and this results in anti-colonial tension, loss of trust in the government, and also that means dissatisfaction of people's rights against the government. And next, political ideology, and this is mainly affected by USSR because Czechoslovakia was affected by USSR greatly, and so important leaders such as Edward Benes, Clement Gottwald, and Husak are three major leaders of Czechoslovakia that were influenced by USSR. And because Benes was influenced by USSR, he victimizes non-communists and signed mutual assistance pact with the USSR, and this causes the Soviet to support the coup that happened in 1948. And during Gottwald's presidency, he had secret polices to use to suppress his opponents. He had churches and he had churches closed down, and communists had the control over the society. And he centralized the economy, making it the one-party rule. And Husak took out normalization, which is moving back to a communist relationship with USSR and communist countries around them, and he remodified law to make it to fit into his government, and it re-established a centralized economy control. And he also expanded the socialist ties, and this causes like 327,000 members to be ousted from the communist group, who he thought will be affecting his government role. And also 900 university lecturers were sacked, and this causes bad living condition, propaganda, dependence on religion, making a rise of nationalism to rise against the government. And moving on to the geopolitical reasons. Geopolitical reasons were mainly divided into three groups: World War I, World War II, and Cold War. So during World War I, its effect was because Czechoslovakia agreed to join with the French to fight the Austrians, and that while they were at fight, when they were coming back, they were forced to fight against the communist Russian soldiers, and this caused them to have a lot of death of soldiers, and this causes the rise in national tension and international tension again. Moving on to World War II. World War II geopolitical reason was mainly by the country Yugoslavia, which was ruled by Joseph Tito, and mainly its resistance against communism in Yugoslavia while being occupied by Germany, and they're fighting against USSR, and this made Stalin to tighten its grip on the rest of the satellite states, including Czechoslovakia. And moving on is the Munich Agreement, where Allies gave permission to Hitler to invade Finland and annex with Czechoslovakia. And because of this invasion and occupation by the Nazi Germans, the Soviets also went in and liberated them from the Nazis, but that also caused, because of the liberation, that also caused the Soviet to be having control over Czechoslovakia, and begins the communist regime, where that resulted in the total death of everything to be very high, and especially problems like military death, civilian death, and also the Jewish Holocaust due to the Nazi regime's death. And so that caused economical downfall, increasing death, and bad living conditions caused people to be angry at the government to uprise. And reasons after the Cold War. So it's the Warsaw Pact. So the Cold War was made the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact is a mutual defense treaty between the communist states in the Eastern Europe during Cold War, and USSR is mainly the head of this agreement, and that also has relation with the Brezhnev doctrine, where USSR thinks that if anything was to threaten the communist in the country of Eastern Bloc, USSR has the right to solve the problem. So that caused the Warsaw Pact invasion in 1968 in Czechoslovakia, and that also made bad living condition and depletion of resource, because people were under bad living condition. That caused them to uprise against the government. And now moving on to nationalism and its effect on the origin and rise of the movements. So first, race. Czechoslovakia has mainly been to race after the Treaty of Versailles, conjoining of the Czech and the Slovaks. So, but there are also constantly different treatment on the Czech and the Slovaks. The Slovaks were treated not as equal. There were prejudice inside them. So, especially under Anthony Novotny's rule, so there were major purges against the Slovaks, and people at first were not recognizing that it was a problem of the purges, but later it was recognized as a problem, and that was mainly because Slovaks are pro-Axis, and and following that, it's the later ruler Miloš Čech, which also initiated political purges on the Slovaks under the name of normalization, because Miloš Čechs often follow Husak's footsteps, and that causes Slovak living condition in Czechoslovakia to be unfairly treated, and there were rise in racial tension, and that caused them to rise against the government. Next is the social economy class problem. So basically, it's talking about the economy class, the wages, the problem of poverty and food shortages in Czechoslovakia in 1951. So in 1953, Dutch government announced on currency reform, and this caused a major problem with food prices to rise, but people did not earn enough money, and thus starvation occurred, and that caused a demonstration against the communist officials, and they were actually lynching the officials because of their unhappiness. And moving on is the also on the command economies, where there is opposition of free marketing because the government decides it's command economies, and where it's the opposite of free market, and thus people were unhappy because the government decides the fruit price and the amount they were to sell and everything like that. And that's what was not in a very good economical condition because of that. Instead of solving the problem, the government just decided to purge the economists. And during Khrushchev's rule, where they were encouraged to follow USSR, they were actually not advantaging from following Khrushchev's rule of market socialism, because this then empowered the managers of the cell, and who gets to set wages higher and fire people at will. But that creates more like a dictatorship government under the managers, because they do at their will, and people were not getting good resources as they should have had. And that all of that caused people to be unhappy and rebel against the government. And next is the cultures. The culture mainly is on how the Czechoslovakia moving towards democracy. And after Stalin's death, there were radical changes in the U.S. political government, which also then affects Czechoslovakia because of their relationship. And in 1950, Russia had a series of 5-year plans that limited aid from COMCOM helped this to happen, and that changes the working condition of the people. However, that does not change how we can't say change working conditions, but change the economical condition. But the people had to work really hard, and they can't leave job or be absent, and they're also put into collective and combines. In 1956, there's where Khrushchev goes back and attacks Stalin's method of ruling and tries to destabilize the Eastern Bloc, including Czechoslovakia. And all this caused party and government tension and democratic threat, and national tension causes people to rise against the government. And religion. So, because there was all kinds of different religion in Czechoslovakia, but however, because of the Warsaw Pact invasion, USSR became the leading or like controlling government of Czechoslovakia, and they were new pro-communist groups where they had Orthodox suppression in 1968, so the Russian Orthodox Church became the main ruling power. And the Russifying caused the Unit Church, the Jewish, or any other religion in Czechoslovakia to be suppressed. And in 1968, the 5 Warsaw Pact nations invaded Czechoslovakia to help leadership replaced by Orthodox hardline communists who was sympathetic to Marxism-Leninism. And with the resignation, the purges eliminated officers, and that caused them also a mass amount of death. And this whole thing caused uprisings against religious indifference and treatment between the Russian Orthodox followers and other religions such as the Unit Church or the Catholic Church or the Catholic Christians or the Jews. And this is the end of my presentation.